All right, you are listening to On the Wake Up Radio.
Everybody
Hi, Jack.
How's it going? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Uh-uh.
No. Oh, boy. All right, let's check this. Cindy, he can't hear me. Camera, mic, audio, microphone. Okay, says my mic's fine. What just happened here?
Hello?
Hi. Can't hear me?
Nope.
You can't hear me.
My mic's good, though. I just checked it. So.
Yeah, mine too. He can't hear me. He can't hear me. That's strange. Camera, mic, my audio. It's pretty good. Sorry. What just happened to my computer? Hello? Nope.
Hey guys, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Jack? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Hi, Jack. How you doing? I can hear you, Jack. I don't know. You got your volume on, Jack. I can hear you though.
No one can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You're clear. He's clear. I'm clear.
Strange. Oh.
You're like clicking on everything.
Yeah, you're on. Just click that.
Can you hear us?
I can hear.
Okay, great.
Little feedback.
Sorry.
An echo.
You can hear me now, right, Jack?
I can.
All right, great.
How are you doing?
Sorry about that.
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing really good. I actually just did a show because I didn't know what the situation was, but I already introduced your book, but because I already talked a lot, I'm going to ask you about different aspects of this book, because I just want to start out by saying the reason I started Forever Questioning Yourself is every time I downloaded the Gaia app. So every time I would go to a topic, I'm like, oh, the same guy. He's deep space, ancient civilization. So I was like, when I admire people's knowledge, I like to follow them. So I bought this book, and I really love this book because I've researched all these topics for a long time, and you never get the real information, like the cows on power lines and the people mutilation and all of that. So I think it's an aspect.
Thanks you. I appreciate that very much. That's the whole reason I wrote the book, is because you rarely get actual field investigators writing books about their cases for some reason. Either they just don't like writing books or what have you. They just make YouTube videos or something like that.
So will you tell us what unified field theory is?
Yeah. So after, now it's been 30 years of paranormal research, I came to suspect that all paranormal activity had a single origin. And the more I looked at it and the more I began to dissect it, I realized that there were actually two separate origins. And I call that my unified field theory of paranormal activity. One of the origins, or one of the subcategories, is what I call interaction with a type 3 civilization. So I don't sure if a lot of people know what a type 3 civilization is.
You could refresh our memory.
Sure. So there's a lot of scientists that go by this, but there was a Russian scientist, his name was Nikolai Kardashev, and he came up with what's called the Kardashev scale of civilizations. And he determined that there were three types of civilizations. Type 1 is basically like us. We're still in a growing phase. Type 2 is a civilization that can harness the entire energy of its neighboring star, 100%. They believe that they can build an entire structure around a star. And it's interesting that some of our astrophysicists and astronomers think that that's what they found at one point a couple of years ago, was a structure built around a star because of the strange oscillation that was going on. But anyway, a type 3 is a civilization that can do that on a galactic scale. It can literally build structures around stars as it's colonizing an entire galaxy. Now, where this all ties in is with the so-called Drake equation and with Fermi's paradox, and I can make those super easy. So there was a guy, and his name was Drake, his last name, and he invented the radio telescope, and he came up with an equation to calculate how many intelligent civilizations there would be in the universe. It was a theoretical equation. And it came up with, billions and billions of civilizations. And another scientist looked at that, and his name was Enrico Fermi. And he said, well, there's something wrong with this, because if there's billions of these civilizations and the universe is as old, just our galaxy is so many billions of years old, that at least one of those civilizations would have been so advanced and so old, and would have survived long enough that they would have colonized our entire Milky Way galaxy. And the equation, Drake's equation, proved him out that should be the case. And he made the famous statement, the absence of aliens on our doorstep is in itself significant. And so what he wasn't paying attention to, along with a lot of our other scientists, was the UFO phenomenon, largely being written off at the time, a bunch of crazy people. But he would have noticed that the aliens were on our doorstep and have been for a very long time. And therefore, his theory of a type 3 civilization, a civilization that literally controls our entire galaxy. So imagine a civilization so old and so advanced that it goes out and it seeds entire planetary systems with the seeds of life. Let's say that those seeds of life contain the genetic code for bipedal hominid type life forms, right? Only to come back at some later point and farm those civilizations into its own. And in between then and there, they send non-stop craft. Usually they are unpiloted. They're a type of drone craft with artificial intelligence that we can't even fathom. Some of them are even living biological structures. They seem to actually make technology out of biology. And they test everything on this planet down to the molecular level. And there's a reason why they've invested so much time, so much energy, so much resources. And there's a lot of evidence showing them protecting the planet from various disasters, various asteroids coming in. They've been demonstrated flying over our nuclear bases and turning off the nuclear weapons, which, by the way, is why we have current UFO disclosure happening. It's for that very reason. And so 1/2 of all paranormal activity is covered under interaction with a type 3 civilization. All alien activity, all cattle mutilations, all abductions, all anomalous lights, anything that has to do with any of that paranormal activity, that's all covered under interaction with a type 3 civilization.
Wow.
What their long-term plan for us.
Well, I was going to say, I know in the book you mentioned about the cattle mutilations, the protein aspect. I don't even know what those are, but that's why I made it a question. What's going on with that? Is that a disease they're trying to prevent from spreading amongst our food supply?
Yeah, it's another example of our interaction, and I think one of the most telling examples of our interaction with a type 3. So cattle mutilations, a lot of people write it off, but they don't realize that cattle mutilations are a misnomer. They're not mutilated. They are surgically operated on. And it's happened to every single species that you can think of, including some wild lizards that were discovered that had been perfectly dissected in the wild. Think about that. That's insane. But in I think it was 67, they had the very first widely publicized case in the United States of cattle mutilation, and it was in the San Luis Valley in Colorado, where I used to live. And there was, I assume everybody knows who Robert Bigelow is. Okay, well, Robert Bigelow formed a group called the NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science. And the government gave them a cattle mutilation as a target, and Robert Bigelow wanted that to be the same thing, right? So in the 1960s, early 70s, there were 2 FBI investigations. They determined that it had to be predators. We know that they just wrote it off that way because there's other memos talking about how there was something going on. The NIDS report was actually on the internet for just a little while, and I was able to download a copy of it, which is fascinating. So this is, in short, what happened. So there was a private, a secret government testing facility in Fort Collins, Colorado, that did animal testing, biological weapon animal testing. And one of those scientists went to New Guinea. He collected samples of Kuru virus. He traveled back to the U.S. with it to the lab, and he injected some wildlife, some elk and some deer, to see what the effects would be. One of those deer escaped, and that very next spring was the very first cases of chronic wasting disease ever being recorded in the United States. So they discovered that, and then they started plotting where chronic wasting disease was breaking out, and they were able to successfully predict where the next cattle mutilations would occur. So they proved through that correlation that whoever was doing this was testing for the same, what they're called prion proteins. These are proteins that are so strong, nobody really knows where they came from. Kuru virus has them, but it's not the origin source of the prion proteins. But they can't even be killed with 1300 degrees Fahrenheit heat, right? So what ends up happening is these elk and deer, they jump right over barbed wire fences, and they eat from the top of the plants, and they leave saliva deposits, and the cattle come up behind them, and cattle rip the whole plant up and eat the whole thing, roots and all. And they become infected. And in cattle, it becomes mad cow disease. But cattle are all butchered before their 5th year, and it takes a little more than 5 years to show signs of mad cow disease. So the NIDS had all of this in their report, and they started looking at what cause that could have in society, and they found out that there was a rise in early Alzheimer's disease by thousands of %. So you're looking at the direct case of that. So at the same time, they made a direct link to black triangular UFO sightings around the same time that these cattle mutilations were taking place. Well, I investigated a number of cases where the ranchers saw black unmarked helicopters in the fields. In one case, another researcher investigated, I know for a fact that he found a burnt cigarette and a boot print right at the fence line of where one of these happened. So we know there was human presence in that field. But if you follow my work, you'll know that I have the only photograph of something in a field. It's in my book.
I downloaded a bunch of pictures if you wanted me to share any of them. Like, I took them off my phone and then emailed them to myself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you can show any of those. But so what ends up looking like happened was that when the food supply became contaminated, the type 3 mechanism for protecting us, testing us, and all of that became aware that the food system was contaminated, and alien testing on those animals began. We know that the technology being used on some of these cattle mutilations was way beyond anything we had. Had to be a portable laser of the kind that they only dreamt of back then. Hair and skin is fused together, which is super intense heat to do that.
Laser, right?
exsanguination, blood's all gone, all the reproductive organs, and interestingly enough, all the organs with the highest cell reproduction rates, which is what you'd want to test if in fact you were testing for contamination in a food supply.
I was going to say, what's the significance of the type of tissue that it's all because that's that. What do they call that tissue? I don't even want to try and think of it right now.
Right. So that's it. And NIDS actually concluded in their report that all signs of the phenomenon point to a clandestine food supply testing program. They stopped short of identifying who was responsible for it, but they did make the link between the black triangle UFOs and the mutilations. So the fact that occurred, and then slightly after that, you can go back to about the early 1980s, it began to happen in domesticated cats in the United States. Look that up. That is totally bizarre. So cats were found, and
that picture is incredible of that cat in half.
Right, and the whole center section's removed. Right, and that's happened time after time. In some cases, within just a few minutes of the owner seeing it, a few minutes go by, and then they come and discover it. No sound, no struggle, no anything. Another point is sometimes the cat's missing for a day or two. Then the owner comes back only to find the cat in that condition on their lawn. So some researchers determined that was in fact part of the phenomenon. It's almost like they're leaving it like they left the cow as some sort of warning, right? So I started doing a ton of research, and I found out that domesticated cats in North America are the most invasive species ever known to mankind. They're responsible. Yeah, they're responsible for killing 2 billion species of bird. That's a lot of birds they're killing, right? Well, birds are migratory, and birds land on the same grazing grounds as these animals that are infected. And so they were transmitting it. The cats were eating the birds, and these entities are removing the contents of the stomach to see whether or not they can contain it. And then I saw an article the other day about cats contracting a type of mad cow disease, which is just.
I think I saw. Did you share that? Because now that you're saying that, I'm like, I think I saw that too. Must have saw it from you.
So the government became savvy to what was going on. They're like, what the hell are they testing for? And so they began their own testing program. They needed to figure out also what was going on. And so that's why you have a cross-contamination of cases where some of these guys are like, I definitely unmarked special forces kind of helicopters, saw them out in the fields or whatever. In other cases, they see it, a UFO clearly raising a cattle into their craft and doing what it's doing and then redepositing it. And those cattle are most often the underside of the body is completely shattered. The bones are all broken, and some of them land in trees, like I've talked about.
But didn't they find? Now I'm gonna break because I'm just going down my little list here. Didn't they find a child like that that was missing before, and they found his body kind of all the bones broken and clothes folded?
With the clothes folded and stuff, that's typical of a missing 411 case, but. The only human mutilation case that I have any physical evidence for is the one that I have in my book there with the actual autopsy report. Yeah, man, that is a fascinating autopsy report. But when I was working with J.C. Johnson, and he was very well connected with the law enforcement agencies around New Mexico, he told me that he got a call one day from a detective who said something very similar was discovered with a 16-year-old girl outside of Farmington, New Mexico, and it was subsequently covered up. The family didn't want anything known, and it's ruled a homicide, but the wounds were pretty much identical to the human case in Brazil there. So.
Do you think our government is in contact with this type 3 civilization? I
think they must be in. elements of. So many abductees and a lot of UFO researchers now believe that the so-called gray aliens and some of the other constructs are in fact, they're a type of biological robot. These things are produced and they are programmed through DNA. Through their DNA, imagine a civilization so advanced that it doesn't need mechanical robots. It takes whatever life form it wants, grows them in whatever batches it wants, and the DNA is the computer program of the entity, right? Well, that's what grays are, and they're sent to perform one single function, and that's the ongoing testing of human genetics, and so a lot of, like, let's take Travis Walton, for example. This is a theme that occurs. Yeah, this occurs over and over again. So they don't show it in the movie Fire in the Sky, but if you listen to his actual testimony or read it, when he wakes up and starts swinging at the little gray guys, they all back up and move out of the room.
And new ones come in, new beings that look more human, right?
Human. He said they look totally human except for their eyes. There was something wrong with their eyes, he kept saying. And the man never said anything to him, but gave him a slight tour of the ship. And then that's the last thing he remembers before waking up. That theme of these human-like beings being somehow in charge of the grays seems to occur time and again. And a lot of people report different species of aliens. It's my contention that they are all the same as the grays. They are biological constructs. They're sent to perform very specific missions, and then they fly back to God knows wherever, So that's how that all fits together.
I love it. When I like I said, when I read it, it all makes sense. Like what you said, it just knowing like that would be how it ties in all this paranormal activity, the UFOs, Bigfoot, right. Which will be another thing because that always has some UFO aspect to it too.
It does, and that's one thing I don't know if people are aware of, but I was part of the team that recovered 2 separate DNA deposits, and when they looked at those DNA strands, it scared those people pretty bad, and it kind of shocked us too. So the mitochondrial was Homo sapiens, so the mother's lineage was modern human, right? The paternal DNA ended up being what they called a genetic chimera construction. So a chimera is an animal that we're doing some chimera work on the earth today, but it's where you fuse genes of different creatures together that wouldn't normally be able to produce any offspring, right? So these things appeared to have on the paternal side some sort of high intelligence construction to their DNA. So, and 20% of all Bigfoot sightings, credible Bigfoot sightings of UFOs, also reported at the scene. And like so many other researchers, me and J.C. Johnson found a 1/4 mile long track line of 19-inch footprints that literally just stopped in the middle of a field where the topography doesn't change. It should have just kept on going. And we're standing there going,
where did it just disappear? You got beamed up somewhere.
Yeah, and we've worked with professional Navajo trackers, and we're out, in the middle of absolutely nowhere where you can't even get cars, and so to think that somebody would be able to perpetrate a hoax like that and not leave any other footprints, and there's no other sign or anything, I just looked up at the sky going, oh my God, instantly I knew that there was one of 2 possibilities. Either there was a interaction with those UFOs that we didn't quite understand, or they were being abducted and tested genetically just like humans were being, and then let go again. Because what's interesting about this track line is that this thing started off walking, and all of a sudden about mid track, it just takes off sprinting. And this thing was a 19-inch footprint. It had to be 9 foot tall. And you got to ask yourself, a 9 foot tall, 1,000-pound animal that's as ferocious as that, what could possibly scare it out in the middle of nowhere so bad that it takes off in a dead sprint? And we know that from the stride went from 6 feet to 10 feet like that. And so whatever it was, whatever got it, scared it. And so it made me think, well, maybe they are running from these things. But
well, you said that it has the chimera DNA and it has like a higher intelligence. A lot of people do say like they feel some psychic kind of thing come over them when they're in that presence. And that guy Todd Standing, I don't know if all his videos, I know they're so controversial, but he has some amazing like footage of their faces and the pictures you have. These things, they look like an ancient kind of prehistoric type of person.
And every face is unique. That's what's fascinating. And Standing is controversial, and for a long time I didn't make up my mind at all. And JC was very well aware of all of the people that Todd was interacting with, because it's a very small circle in the inner Bigfoot community of the researchers that have done a lot of work, right? It's like, 20 people, and most of them knew Todd. And so I basically started tantamount to a personal, instead of investigating the photographs themselves, I investigated the man. And what I found talking to all of these people was that Todd has always been very, very financially poor. Not a big deal, but he could barely afford a car at the time that these photographs were taken. I've shown those photographs to some Hollywood employed makeup artists. They assure me that not only would it take somebody of their training, but also somewhere in the neighborhood of $20,000 to be able to do a makeup job of that quality, especially out in the wild. It's not like they made him up in Toronto and drove him out to, the Savannah area and took a picture. They would have had to have put that mask, all of that makeup on in the wild, right? And the fact that he didn't make them look alike, that one looked so different from the other, lends itself to absolute authenticity, because if you examine all of the close-up face photographs of Sasquatch taken by all the researchers, no two look alike.
No, they really don't, actually.
They really don't.
Not even the noses are never even the same.
Right. And nobody that would try to perpetrate a hoax would really know that unless they had been there and just recorded what they saw, because that's what we also discovered in the field. In fact, it was kind of shocking to me that they were so different. I mean, so all of that is compelling, circumstantial, yes, but very interesting evidence pointing us in that direction.
I've always believed it. I feel like I was just born like that. Like I just always like felt beings around me. I always was out looking out the window up at the sky. Like I always was like that. So it only makes sense to me. Right. And I love, I read this in the beginning, like the first chapter, the way you start, any sufficiently advanced science would be indistinguishable from magic. Right. The Arthur C. Clarke quote. And it's like, that's obviously what when people can't explain things, that's what we're experiencing.
And when I read that quote, it made all of the pieces fit together perfectly, because the only people or the only type of society that's going to have a science that's indistinguishable from magic to us is a type 3 civilization. And
because they know how to control nature, they know how to manipulate nature. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, their technology is so advanced to us, it's like magic, So, and absolutely. So the other branch of the paranormal tree is all interdimensional in nature. So, and that's how they're unified. Now, interdimensional is interesting on this planet, and that's why I call it Paranormal Planet, is because so there are various areas that people call vortex areas, right? And these vortex areas are areas where a wide array of paranormal activity all occurs in a relatively small geographic area over eons of time. The topography under each of these areas, no matter if it's Sedona or the San Luis Valley in Colorado or anywhere else that's considered a UFO hotspot vortex type area, there are large deposits of quartz crystal These are all mountainous areas, and the quartz crystal deposits are gigantic. And in every one of these spots, the indigenous people hold the area sacred, which is an interesting correlation, right? So I began researching that, and what I discovered was that basically I came up with the idea based on a scientist who built what he calls a Mach effect thruster. So, and this actually works. So he proved that as matter travels through space, there's these minute fluctuations, and those minute fluctuations in the matter can be harnessed as a type of 0-point energy and used as propulsion. And that's the Mach effect thruster engine. Like if you Google it, you'll see a picture of it.
It doesn't produce an exhaust or something, right? I remember it.
Right. So these vibrations, these little fluctuations can be picked up and used, transmitted in some kind of energy, and it's used that way. But the point to me was the movement of matter through space and these minute fluctuations, because it occurs in all matter. And the Earth is a big ball of matter that's traveling through space, and it too is having these minute fluctuations. Well, when you have huge quartz crystal deposits and you compress them, all of the atoms become ionized. And when they do, they produce these vast electromagnetic fields. They're like in the case of Sedona, the mountains are 500 times the electromagnetic field strength in the surrounding countryside.
Wow.
Huge power, right?
That's why people can feel it. Like they can feel the energy.
Right. Yeah. It's the electromagnetic energy. And this is the same in every one of these areas. It's the one thing they all have in common. And a physicist like Michio Kaku, I'm sure you've seen the Japanese physicist, and a lot of others have talked about that other dimensions absolutely exist.
String theory.
Right. And that there has to be beings on those dimensions. And some of them have to be intelligent enough to have figured out a way into other dimensions, right? Well, what you have occurring, and this is an interesting point, all of these physicists say that the only thing separating our dimension from another is an electromagnetic membrane, right? Here you have electromagnetic fields in these vortex areas that are so strong that they create a tear or a rip in that membrane long enough for a momentary interaction to occur, and we describe that interaction as paranormal. That's what you're seeing. And that little, pockets of doors opening and things happens all over the planet. But in these areas, it's extremely pronounced because of how strong these fields are.
I was going to bring up the case that you feature in your book. He features so many amazing cases with the skier who went from New York and ends up in Sacramento. I'm going to let you explain that. I'm just going to go plug in my computer. It's dying.
Oh, sure. So, yeah, it's actually one of the cases that David Paulides also talks about, but true story. In fact, I'm pretty sure you can Google it and pull up some news about it, but there's a skier and he was on a slope in New York and he's going down the slope and this guy basically just disappears into thin air. Nobody can find him. They do search parties. He's nowhere. His wallet, keys, phone, everything are in his hotel room. And he's just gone. A day or two later, a gentleman is seen in downtown Sacramento stumbling down the road dressed in ski gear and totally confused, doesn't know where he's at, doesn't really know who he is even at this stage. And come to find out, he is the missing skier from New York with no recollection of how he went from point A to point B. Still without his keys, still without his wallet, still without his phone. Only his ski gear on.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And so that to me is one of these areas where these vortexes are creating, it could be that he went through a wormhole and just popped out the other side of some kind. And I think a lot of the missing person cases in the wilderness areas could be attributed to this mechanism. I mean,
there's a lot of granite.
Yeah. And imagine the horror of stepping through a doorway and all of a sudden.
I mean, I kind of want to, but I don't.
Yeah, well, who knows? You could be stepping into a jungle of just vicious predators. You don't know, and they just spit the bones back up. You know.
My gosh. So ends up something's scat.
Right, you know. So and those are the two different branches of the tree. All paranormal, including ghost activity, can be included in that as interdimensional in nature. So
So I wanted to ask you about this because they had that show recently, and I actually thought of you. The show they had last year about Skinwalker Ranch, where they did all these science experiments. And I know that one episode they were doing a science experiment, and they were basically saying that something was above them that they couldn't see. So I felt like that's something I was like, I've got to bring up to Jack in tonight's conversation about Skinwalker Ranch, because that's probably a perfect example.
It is, and they made Skinwalker Ranch is one of these areas, perfect. And so they made history on that show. They're the first people to capture a UFO with a actual film crew there, two different film crews, what was it, 6 or 7 eyewitnesses, and they caught it twice in one day. And that's never been done before on like a network television show. And how they did it was they were launching rockets up into the air, and it provoked this response. This orb showed up, and when it did, one of the cattle totally freaked out.
Oh, yes, I do remember that.
Went into shock. So that's what you're seeing there, right? But they also poked below, right? They did some stuff digging on the property, and it provoked a response.
The guy got like a welt in his head.
Yeah, that happened before, but just on them digging alone, it provoked a response. After that,
just from them breaking dirt, just at all, yeah.
Right. So you're seeing if you poke up, you get a response. If you poke down, you get a response. How far do you have to keep poking out till you no longer get a response? And then you're going to know how big it is, whatever's buried there, because something is buried on that property. And I'm wagering that it's a big UFO of some kind. And there's some sort of intelligence, obviously, still cognizant within this craft that's interacting. Bigelow's group, the NIDS, the one thing that they put in their final report on Skinwalker Ranch was that they were interacting with a non-human intelligence. That's all they could say about it.
Do you think this intelligence, this Type 3 civilization, is operating out of Antarctica? You think they're connected, or you think that's something separate alien species?
No, I think it's completely separate in that that civilization came from Mars. I told George Noria about this whole thing, and it's almost its own show, really. But that was before Mars got obliterated, where a couple of their arcs landed, they began to build a civilization, and then it was destroyed by a natural cataclysm. And it left these vast archaeological finds and technology that they're now pulling up out of the ice and the snow. And
because that's clearly a pyramid, and they say that it could be like when I hear some of the explanations of them trying to say it's a mountain range, that makes me nuts. It makes me feel like how ignorant and dumb do they think we all are?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Even the dips, and even how the pyramid's not completely flat. It's incredible.
Yeah, even indented on the sides. And I don't know if you've seen the picture of the gigantic staircase, but it's an enormous staircase that goes up. It's covered in ice down here and covered in ice up there, but you can see part of the structure. And I also published a face that was discovered there that as the ice was melting away, they had a blowing snowstorm that revealed the eyes and mouth of this face. And it looked very much like the face on Cydonia. On Mars, which is very interesting. But we'll do another show where I talk about all the evidence for and what happened to Mars, because it really comes into play, and it interacts with the mystery of the Anunnaki quite a bit.
For sure. Then we'll definitely, if you would definitely come back, I will definitely do it next week, because we're actually running out of time now. But you are a wealth of knowledge. I mean, even you even know Gnostic wisdom. You really are
Yeah, I started, I've been studying Gnosticism and Western occult tradition for as long as I've been doing paranormal research. And so I've got a real education in that as well, which I think helps with, investigating a lot
Kind of
of
understanding.
paranormal stuff. So, but yeah, no, thanks for having me on. We'll definitely schedule another one. We'll talk about Mars because that is a fascinating thing. And
Yeah.
by the way, I will tell you this: a lot of the technologies that were hidden in Antarctica are about to make their way into the public. So over the next, let's say 4 to 5 years, you're going to see an amazing amount of new technology being introduced, and that's predicted.
That's true. Okay.
Yeah, and that's predicted by Cliff High's WebBot, which uses the neuro-linguistic data trend analysis, and it's unbelievably accurate with things like that. So he even talks about the Antarctica digs and archaeological digs and stuff. It's fascinating, artificial intelligence. But
that's awesome.
But anyway, yeah, have me on again.
Thanks. Next week, next Saturday or the Saturday after that, I'll definitely message with you to confirm.
Right. Sounds good. All right.
Thank you so much, Jack.
You're welcome. You guys have a good night.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. So you're listening to On the Wake Up Radio. That was Jack Cary with Paranormal Planet. Thank you again to super producer Cindy Ashby. I'm gonna go.